Okay, thank you for joining. Very excited about tonight. The first of our series that we're doing with WIC Insights and my colleague David Burrell, who's here with us, to talk about the undecided voters in the battleground states. David and I have collaborated with our organizations because we think this is not only the best way to track who's going to win this election, but also to understand the country. Because in the voices, whether you're looking at polling data that's quantitative or the qualitative focus groups, in their voices, you hear what the country's going through, the struggle through all this ambivalence that so many people have to try to make a decision about who to vote for or to vote at all. And so we look at the battleground states. Now, if there are battleground states added, I don't think there will be, but if there are, we'll add them too. But if you think about your normal polling that you see, it's not of undecided voters, it's of all voters. And while I respect the undecided voter in California and the undecided voter in Alabama, they're not going to decide who wins the election. And so our project is unique in two ways at least. One is we're only focused on undecided voters in the polling and in the focus groups. And second, we're doing them simultaneously. We're doing them in tandem. Because when you marry up the quantitative data that you get from a poll with the qualitative fingertip feel you can get from a focus group, that's going to provide us, we think, some really valuable insights. And the first one has succeeded, we think, quite well. We didn't just gather 8 random people who sort of suggested they were undecided. David and his firm used their expertise in research and in recruitment to find 8 great Americans, really good talkers, from Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, who, in their expression through the focus group, which we'll watch together in a moment, really do give voice to what a lot of the country is struggling with, and certainly what the undecideds are. So I want to talk to David for just a little bit. So if we can bring David up. And first I want to say, David today made his first appearance on Morning Joe in his career. And it turns out, we didn't tell the producers of Morning Joe, it was David's first time on television. So there it is. He looks like a veteran. So David, not everyone on this Zoom has been on Morning Joe. What was it like?
What was it like? Well, first off, hello, everyone. I think I said it was definitely a treat to be on. It was definitely a new experience for me, but I honestly thought it was, when I got to rewatch it, I thought it was great content that got created because, not because of me, but, they really showed some interesting stuff and asked some great questions. And I mean, I thought it was, provided insights that we definitely need to get out about this group of people that, as Mark was saying, we hardly ever get to, get any insight into, because undecideds are not the ones that are always speaking their mind either. They're a little, like Mark said, ambivalent and so on. So, but it was definitely a treat, new for me. But thank you.
So, David, part of this project, you and I agree, is about transparency. Is about letting people understand how we're doing this. So, first, I want you to just tell people: are you a businessman? Are you a pollster? Are you a data scientist? What's your background, and how does your firm work in these kind of projects? What expertise do you bring to bear?
Right. So. I run a market research company, and we do specialize in public opinion research. And I would say that's primarily the most research we do, is really trying to get into the citizens and the voters, and understand their hearts and minds more. For us, that means doing qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative being, y'all would think of it as polling, but sometimes we're doing more than that, testing messages or exposing people to ads or whatever, the clients that we're working for need us to do. And on the qualitative side, it's doing what y'all are about to see. It's trying to get a good mix of voices. So we're making sure, whatever that market is, we're trying to get insights out of, that, all the different types of voices are represented, and which I think you'll see in a second, was really successful in this one.
And David, you're not a partisan firm, right? You work for people across the spectrum.
Correct. We're one of the few nonpartisan firms that does primarily public opinion research.
Right. And talk about the recruitment. First, let's talk about the polling methodology. You don't do live calls, which in the olden days was the gold standard, but talk about how you poll now, how you find people to poll.
Sure. So on the polling side, what we do is we, look at national voter files. So we take these national voter files, and we try to find people who voted in one out of the last 2 elections in this case, one out of the last 2 general elections, and also have a high reliability cell phone. because we found that people are much more likely to answer a text on their cell saying, hey, are you willing to participate in a poll, than they are to answer their actual cell phone or their landline, especially when we're trying to get such a hard to reach audience like this. So we created a survey that you can take online, and we sent links of that survey. Some of y'all may have gotten these links before, if you've ever gotten asked to take a poll. And we sent links of that survey to the voters in the state. Now, in that survey, we had pretty strict questions. We call them screeners. And so, like, you had to answer, we had to, verify that you were, in fact, considering voting for multiple people in this election or considering not voting at all, to qualify for this survey. And in the end, we were able to get 300 participants across the 3 states that met those qualifications, took the online survey on their cell phone. And if y'all seen the PDF yet, or I know Mark has posted it, that's the results are in in a PDF that everyone in this group can view.
So in the second hour, we're going to look at some of the slides from the poll. We're going to talk about the poll. The hope is when you do our unique project, matching up a poll with a focus group, that the results, if not identical, are in the same direction. So that if the voters in the poll say they think Trump's better on the economy than Biden, you'd like to think the focus group would be the same. And I'm here to say, spoiler alert, everything's in the same direction. Not necessarily the same magnitude, but everything's in the same direction. So talk about the people we recruited. These are 8 people from the 3 states. 3 of them voted for Trump in 20, 3 of them voted for Biden, 1 voted for the Libertarian, 1 didn't vote. And just talk about how we determined that these people were undecided and ambivalent voters. How was that determination made?
Sure. So, I mean, once again, this was a great, one of the most rigorous projects I've done, academic grade type of projects I've done, because of, we wanted to make sure we got real voters. These aren't people that are pre-opted in on panels that have all, frequent focus group takers that, you can go kind of access. And so what we did was very similar to the survey research, the survey sampling, is we sent text messages, but just asking a question, would you like to participate in a focus group, to random samples of voters in these 3 states. And if people said yes, they were we sent them another survey saying, pretty much asking screening questions to make sure if they qualified, if they were undecided. And then the people who said, who answered the survey questions indicating that they were undecided, were sent through another screen where we did interviews with them to make sure, even to ask once again, are you really undecided? Are you in these states? And if they were, then we asked them to participate in the focus group.
And then as an extra layer of qualification, as our colleagues dealt with these potential participants in the focus group to arrange to make sure their internet was strong enough and that they knew how to use Zoom and all of that, we again engaged with them to make sure. I've been involved with a lot of focus groups, and recruitment is the toughest thing. And on this project, recruitment is all. We have to have people who are undecided. Now, there's different kinds of undecideds. There's someone who is probably going to vote for Biden or probably going to vote for Trump, but they still haven't decided firmly. And then there are people who are truly jump balls. And part of what I thought was so compelling about the group, which again we're going to watch in a moment, is they really are undecided. Not a one of them, I think, really has a firm sense. David is going to watch with us when we finish watching the focus group. It's about 45 minutes. I think you'll enjoy most, if not all of it. David will be available. He'll stay with us in the next hour, and also being joined by some other great folks with knowledge of these areas. And you can ask questions about the methodology of the poll. And as I said, we will go over some of the results from the poll as well. David, anything else you want to say before we roll tape here?
No, this is going to be great. Thank you.
David, thank you. Everybody, sit back, relax. 45 minutes. Pretty self-explanatory with the setup we just did. And after we're done, David and others will come back. We'll talk about the focus group. We'll talk about the poll. We'll look at some of the poll results. And as always, we'll be taking your questions, listening to your comments. So please be ready for that. With that, I'll ask my colleagues to roll the focus group.
Welcome, everybody. Today, we're joined by 8 voters from the key battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, all undecided voters. And just to be clear, raise your hand if you voted for Joe Biden in 2020. Raise your hand if you voted for Joe Biden in 2020. That's Kim, Katie, and Omar. And raise your hand if you voted for Donald Trump in 2020. So 3 of you voted for Trump and 3 of you voted for Biden. Raise your hand if you consider yourself an undecided voter in this election, this presidential election. Raise your hand if you consider yourself an undecided voter. And raise your hand if you're unhappy with the choices for president this year. Raise your hand if you're unhappy. All right. So that's everybody. Okay. How do you feel about the choices for president this year? As you think about what's on offer, how do you feel about the choices? Gigi, how do you feel?
Not great.
Great.
Totally
I was going to
lost,
say the
Charlie.
same thing. I haven't
Embarrassed.
felt good for several elections. You know, it's been a while. It feels really unfortunate that we, you know, every 4 years, I feel like finding ourselves in the same situation where I feel like I'm picking the least worst choice. This year, I mean, I am a little bit more interested in the fact that we have someone like Robert F. Kennedy. He has me interested in the different things that he's saying and putting out there. So unlike the last election where I was like really like I don't want either, I'm like okay, like maybe let's see what's on the table with this other character.
We'll talk about Bobby Kennedy in a little bit, but other folks, just in general, how are you feeling about the choices? What words would you use to describe them?
I just feel like we've seen this timeline before. And going back to what Gigi said, like it's been picking the lesser of 2 evils, resulting in evil for, you know, I don't know how many iterations now, and it's just getting old.
Yeah.
Yes, it just feels like they haven't earned the vote, you know?
Mm-hmm.
No, you got to pick.
I think it says a lot about our country not having good options. I think that's, you know, as a country, we should be embarrassed that this is the best 2 that we can put up to choose from.
We should have more options, more variety to choose from, not just the same 2 sides.
I wish there was 2 completely different guys out here to choose from. Really do.
What traits are missing from the candidates that are being available? What would you like to see different in some other type of candidate?
Well, first of all the back and forth and commotion with each other that they're portraying to everybody. I would like to see just a couple of reports of one of them, just all about what's going on with the world, with our different countries and stuff, instead of what they want. And all the fighting it makes you not want to even pay attention. I'm pretty much lost right now.
So
Feels
candidate
like-
who talks more about what you care about. Go ahead, Omar.
I was just going to say they're definitely touching on, the party, like key points. Each party has their key points, but I feel like just compassion, morality, integrity, that's like those are missing from both sides. And there's really like I don't see any other way around it. I see hypocrisy and I see just self-service out of all candidates.
Yeah, integrity.
Hypocrisy and self-service are 2 like big words that I would agree with is what I see that I wish would not be present.
Integrity, I think, is a big thing that's missing. There was a time when most of the candidates and presidents were military men, and they understood stuff like that, like honor, integrity, service, these things. And we haven't had that in decades.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Virginia?
Yeah, I was just going to say respect. I mean, neither one respects each other. And I mean, respect, I remember even as a kid, you respected the president. You respected who was in office. Now it's just a bunch of bashing each other, and it's not cool.
It's not just
Yeah.
respect for each other, it's respect for the people as well. Like on both sides,
You're right.
like how many people feel disenfranchised by these 2 folks?
Yeah. I think we live in a real accountability vacuum too, as far as politics goes, especially at the highest levels. It seems that the sole purpose to be in power is to not get in trouble often, and people fight to have that position.
I want to go around and ask you all one or 2 words as you think about between now and November, watching the candidates, watching the campaign. What's 1 or 2 words about how you feel thinking about that? 1 or 2 words to describe how you feel thinking about the rest of this political year. Let's start with you, Virginia.
I just have so much anxiety about the whole thing.
Okay. Anxiety is a great word. 1 or 2 words. That's all I need from you on this round. Sean?
Embarrassed.
Embarrassed. Okay. Tanisha?
Just confused about which way to go.
Okay. Katie, 1 or 2 words about how you feel about this presidential year?
Confused.
Okay, Nathan.
Not hopeful.
Okay, Gigi.
Frustrated.
Frustrated. Okay, Omar.
I'll say disappointed and optimistic.
Okay, and Kim.
Ashamed and confused.
Ashamed and confused. Okay, I want to talk about President Biden. He's standing for re-election. And I want to start in terms of thinking about your positive thoughts about President Biden. Gigi, I'll start with you. What's the best argument for giving President Biden another term that you see?
I know his stance. I agree with his stance on abortion. I mean, for me, that's probably the only positive I have right now, and that's a big issue.
What other people think? What do you see as the best argument for another term for President Biden?
I agree with you.
Yeah,
That's the only positive thing I've got going for him.
he definitely like shows more care towards disenfranchised people. Like he's not one of the, hey, you're on your own kind of people. And I personally agree with, like we should be supporting people who need support, and it should be kind of a collective good sort of thing. And I think he's not a socialist, but Biden definitely, represents that far more than Trump does. And that's the case, I would say.
Other people who haven't talked, what's the best case you can make for another term for the president?
I like what he did with loan forgiveness for college students and with their debt from loans for college. I think that was something positive he was trying to do, and that was something I liked about him.
I think he's doing well with the carbon credits and the environmental issues.
I think he represents something of a safe status quo choice. If that's a good thing or not, I'm not really certain.
Okay. Nathan, I'm going to stay with you and switch up the question. What's your biggest reservation about giving another term to President Biden? What's your single biggest reservation?
Yeah, I think he's been absolutely disastrous for the economy.
I agree.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you agree. Raise your hand if you agree with Nathan that President Biden's performance in the economy is your biggest reservation.
Oh,
okay.
Well,
all but one of the biggest.
A big one.
We can make
I put my hand out on
it's
its
a big
biggest.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a big one, but not necessarily the biggest one for a lot of you.
No.
Tanisha, what's your biggest reservation about another term for President Biden?
I don't know. It's just seeing him speak and some of his mistakes and errors. I feel I'm not sure if he should continue or he should retire. So I'm just kind of on the line about that. And just seeing the different things that he was supposed to do and then him making mistakes or errors. So I'm a little bit on the fence about that.
I think to Tanisha's point, I don't think the health thing it's a big issue because I just, you want to have someone in there for 4 years. So you're voting that person in. You're not necessarily wanting to vote in the vice president. And from what we've seen of his health just in this term, it's concerning to be putting him up for election again, just on that alone.
Yep.
Raise your hand if you have doubts about whether President Biden would finish his term. Raise your hand if you have doubts about if he's reelected, whether he'd finish his term. All right, so just all right, keep them up just because we got some late votes here. All right, so all but two of you do. All but two of you have some doubts about that. And of the six of you who said you have some doubts, is that a reason you might not vote for him? Is that a consideration?
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely.
It's a possibility, but it's not like the main thing.
I think one of the things we don't necessarily even know for certain is who his VP will be. And I think that uncertainty is out there. I think Harris has been tremendously unpopular with the vast majority of voters. And I think there may be a last minute switch. And I think that may be holding people back from going all in on Biden.
I want to ask you now about President Biden versus President Trump on this question. And we'll start with show of hands and then we'll talk about it. Whose policies do you think would be better for your family, personal finances, your family's personal finances going forward? Whose policies? Raise your hand if you think President Trump's policies on the economy would be better for your family personally. Raise your hand. All right, so that is everybody. Okay, let's talk about that. President Biden argues that his economic record has been very good. He said President Trump's was not as good. What are you keying off of? Sean, since you had the best smile in Virginia, the second best smile, what are you keying off of to say President Trump's economic policies would be better for you?
I mean, my past performance of my 401k. I mean, I have hard data of my finances that I can just look at and say, well, that's. I mean, now I know it was post 2020 and everything kind of flipped around, but you know, you can't blame everything on 2020 for forever. You know.
Okay, Virginia, why are you smiling at the question?
I mean, yeah, businesses just seem to be booming. I mean, we have areas here in Pennsylvania where it's just at a standstill right now. Like things are supposed to be being built and the interest rates are just way too high for people to invest and start moving around.
And Virginia, just staying with you because Pennsylvania is near and dear to Joe Biden's heart. Are there Biden policies that you would blame for the problem? And if so, what are they? Or Trump policies you would credit? I'm
just still looking at the interest rate. You know, the interest rate is so high right now, and I know they're trying to cut the inflation down. But like, if the interest rate is not low, nobody is building. No businesses are really coming to Pennsylvania right now to keep us moving forward. It's just kind of stagnant right now. Nothing seems to be happening.
Does anybody have a story to share about your family's personal finances since Joe Biden's been in the White House, where you'd say, because of Joe Biden, like that's been a problem for my family? Does anybody have a story that they'd like to share about that? Virginia, go ahead.
We really want to add on an addition to our house, but I mean, there is no way we can afford to do that. We're a family of 6, and I really need to have a new bedroom and a bathroom, and not the way the interest rates are right now. They're just way too high.
But you attribute that to Joe Biden's policies?
I do, because if the interest rate was lower when Trump was in, I would be able to do more. Definitely be able to do more.
The prices of everything is so high now. The price of food, the price of living, even if you're trying to buy a house, because I'm trying to become a first-time home buyer, the prices are so high right now. It's just hard.
You can't do anything. You just have to rent.
Yeah.
Is there anything Joe Biden could do or say between now and the time you vote that would make you feel differently about feeling that his policies would not be as good for your family on the economy? Or are you pretty much decided that Trump's policies would be better for the economy?
I mean, I feel like he doesn't even take accountability for at all with what's going on in the economy. Not even accountability. Like, he's in denial that it's happening. Like, his team is like, no, there's the inflation isn't that bad. The markup on groceries and just everyday goods, it's not that bad. And you're like, oh, but my grocery bill has gone up like at least $150 a week in the last 2 years.
Agree.
We're a family with 2 adults and 1 baby. Like, that's crazy.
And it's almost a little bit. It's too late. I mean, you're talking 3.5 years into his term, and now you're going to do something about it. You know, for what? So you get reelected, and then everything goes right back to the way it was before. Yeah, no.
The point is, Biden needs to hear the people, because when he's talking about the economy doing stellar, he's talking about the stock market. He's not looking at homelessness or joblessness. He's not, to Gigi's point, thinking about how much it costs to go to the grocery store. And he's gaslighting literally everyone in the process. It's definitely a lot that you could be doing better there.
Okay. And Omar, you voted for Joe Biden last time, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask you now about a different issue and a comparison between President Biden and President Trump, which is, who do you think in office, both in terms of their presidencies and the next presidency, who would keep America safer? Who would do a better job of keeping America safe? Raise your hand if you think President Biden would do a better job of keeping America safe. President Biden. Omar. Okay. And hand down, Omar. And raise your hand if you think President Trump would do a better job of keeping us safe. All right. So that's everybody else except Kim. You think it's a tie?
Yeah.
Okay. Tanisha, explain why you think President Trump would do a better job of keeping America safe around the world.
Well, because he's all for America. I know people may have their opinions about him, but he's all for, building America, making America better, helping businesses. He's a businessman. He was a businessman before he became president. So he knows how to make more money and build up our country. So I'm kind of on the fence about him, but as far as his business aspect, I think that will help to keep us safer.
I would hear from others of you who think President Trump's policies would keep America safer. Tell me why.
I would say that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Gigi.
First Nathan and then Gigi. No, Nathan,
Okay,
you go and then
sure.
Gigi.
I think Trump, but only marginally so because he projects strength, and Biden, I think, just projects weakness. I think to my liking, they're both far too pro-war. I would like to see the U.S. out of a lot of these foreign entanglements. Eisenhower warned us about this long ago, and here we are walking right into it all over again. But yeah, I think Trump just because he projects a little more strength than Biden.
I mean, I agree with part of what you're saying, Nathan, and President Trump definitely projects a stronger presence, I believe, as well. And I think when he was, our president, that came across as some people thinking that put us in danger because he was more aggressive, more, that's how it was portrayed. But look at the conflicts that we are in now and have been brought into while Biden has been in power. So I also just feel like part of this too, and I'm sure this is going to be another topic we're going into, is immigration. For me, I think the open borders leaves our country to be very unsafe. And that's my biggest concern with the safety of our country.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. I don't want to prejudge it, but raise your hand if you think President Trump would be better than President Biden at securing the Mexican border. Raise your hand if you think President Trump would do a better job. All right, so that's everyone but Omar. Okay, we'll come back to immigration in a moment, but I want to ask you another question of comparison between them. Think about this one. Between President Biden and President Trump, who do you think better understands the daily challenges faced by people like you? Okay, who do you think better understands the daily challenges faced by people like you? Raise your hand if you think President Trump better understands the daily challenges. All right, surprisingly, Omar says yes to that one, and Gigi. And raise your hand if you think President Biden better understands your daily challenges.
Yes.
I feel like neither of them really do.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So if I offered you a tie or that neither of them really does, who would vote for that? Raise your hand if you say.
Oh,
Neither. Yeah.
All right, neither one. All right, Katie.
I mean, that's most politicians, I feel like. Though.
I think Trump is better to appealing.
Okay. What if I asked you to compare them to, say, Barack Obama? Would you say that he understood better?
Yes.
Omar says yes.
Okay. A little bit.
All right.
I'd say slightly.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come back. I wanted to ask you a little bit about President Trump, because I'm surprised on one level that given what the group in general, what you said about President Biden, you don't really think he understands people like you. You think he's been bad on the economy. You don't think he'd do as good a job at controlling the southern border as President Trump. You don't think he'd keep the world as safe, not all of you, but most of you. And yet you're not all voting for Donald Trump. So let's start with Virginia. Virginia, what is it that gives you reservations about Donald Trump?
I just think Donald Trump is mean. He's a bully, and I think his policies are solid. I pretty much agree with most of them. I just don't like him as a leader.
Okay. Other folks, tell me what reservation, what's your primary reservation, Sean, about Donald Trump?
I don't think he does a lot to try to bring groups together. And from when he ran the last time, our country became so divided. And I don't know if it's anything particular about what he said or did, but our country really we picked sides on this, and it just got out.
I feel like people forget about that, Sean. That's such a good point. It's like Trump is so volatile, and not only internal strife and conflict, but I don't feel comfortable with him calling someone with nukes rocket man. It's like I don't want him inflaming.
100%.
I'm an
I thought it was funny too, but maybe Kim Jong didn't.
I know.
So I've heard people say he's mean. And have reservations about the sort of
that
style.
doesn't bother me, but I just think that there could be more done for the people in terms of that, where he just said, well, I don't know. I don't really know how that works. Did he just reveal how the human heart is throughout the country anyway? Or did he cause it? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the problem.
And I think that so much behind social media. I mean, it's like, you just get your fingers off the phone.
Yeah, he definitely
There's pros and cons.
It's easy to hide behind that screen,
it's a situation that went on at the Capitol for me that got really out of control. It makes you wonder, well, if he's back in there, what could, anything could happen now. It's really a scary thing.
I feel like if
What-
Trump just shut his mouth, like, and just did his policy and his work, I would say, yes, please come back. But if he just learns to keep his mouth closed, don't make comments about people that he might not necessarily like that much, and just be a strong leader and do his job.
I think that I keep hearing everybody say, and I agree to, and everybody's just kind of saying it a different way. It's like, yes, he's mean or whatever, but it's that he's divisive, period. The divisiveness that he causes in the country is like the big problem. His policies like could be great, but that almost undermines that all, the way that it caused the divide and the craziness within our country.
He's actually told a number of different groups, a number of different people in different places that his position differs based on his audience. And I mean, as a politician, that's a great skill to have, but it just makes him so untrustworthy to anybody who's paying attention that, he has more camps than he has feet, and he just shuffles around and exists where he needs to in order to please the most people in that moment. And that just seems entirely disingenuous. It is, Omar.
It
is, Omar.
not like in immediate state. I get what you're saying with respect to Trump, but in general, politicians are as wishy-washy as.
And I hear people who are big Trump supporters like basically say that though that's like one of the things, like they like that he's so transparent about like his the way he is. Like that's what you'll hear people say.
Kim raised January 6th, and obviously that's one of the areas where President Trump is now facing some criminal indictments. I want to talk a little bit about whether the indictments and any possible convictions could impact how you decide to vote in the end, or whether you decide to vote. Sean, let's start with you. How do you feel about the indictments and any possible conviction?
I just think they're a political farce. If this was such a big deal, we have a policy here in America, right to a speedy trial. Like, why wasn't this brought up in 2020 or 2021? Now it just shows that they're just trying to railroad them to try to get them off the ballot. It's really just, come on.
Okay. How do other people feel compared to what Sean said?
I mean, I agree with that.
In line with that, but it just feels like the DOJ at this point is completely abusing the justice system. And don't get me wrong, like there are some things that I agree, like he probably, well, I don't have facts, but he probably should be charged for. Like he probably was guilty of some of that. But it's entirely being weaponized, and it doesn't seem fair at all. And it feels like just like a big brother tactic to keep dissenters down. And even if I don't agree with Trump, I disagree with that more.
Does anyone feel differently about the prosecutions from Sean and Omar? And I gather from the head nodding Virginia. Does anyone think these prosecutions are legitimate, important? Anybody?
I think some of them are important. I also feel like if they have the proof, then why is it being dragged out so far? If it was any of us, and if it was any of us, they'd have handled it.
Let me ask you if you agree with this statement that the prosecutions, again, there are 4 of them, but these prosecutions, in terms of how they've been dragged out, was politically motivated by the part of the prosecutors. Raise your hand if you agree with that. That the prosecution timing has been politically motivated. All right, so everybody but Kim. Kim, you're not. You don't
because
think
I don't understand.
Okay, but the rest of you think the timing of it. Let me ask you
most
this.
Definitely, the timing. Yeah,
timing's dragged out. All right, so all of you think that. Tanisha, if Donald Trump were convicted, and maybe you'd feel differently depending on which charges he was convicted of, but he felt convicted, would that make you feel less likely to vote for him or no?
I think it would depend on the charges, and because it was dragged out for so long, it depends on the charges.
Can anyone think of any of the charges he's facing? And again, it's a lot. You've got busy lives, maybe not following it super closely, but can anyone think of any of the charges that you think is particularly serious, where your sense is he is guilty from what you've heard, and you think if he is convicted that it's a serious disqualification? Can anyone name anything that he's charged with you feel that way about?
I heard treason being kicked around in the beginning. I don't know if that was ever an official charge. Because back in the day, we would just take them out and hang them or shoot them, right? Like,
yeah, I'm not sure of the word, but definitely one is like incitement of dissent.
Yeah, inciting
like
a
it's
riot.
incitement of something. Yeah, but it's like specific to overruling the current administration, which I mean is a bit of a stretch, but definitely something important. I think another is tax fraud, something like that. Like he owes the IRS a lot of money. I'm not 100% though.
on his. I don't think tax fraud has any bearing on his ability to lead the country. I mean,
It's a moral thing.
well, yeah, it's a moral thing, but yet, you can go up and down the street, and I bet you 9 out of 10 of your neighbors has lied somewhere along the line on their taxes. I mean, it's
Yeah, and he was very transparent about that when he ran Hillary. He said he's just using the laws the way they are. They're like, if you don't like it, change the laws. He's like, but I know you won't.
We've talked a little bit about politicians and ethics, and particularly Trump and Biden. Just a show of hands, if you were rating them in terms of honesty, truthfulness, and character. I'm going to ask you about Trump, Biden, and no difference. Who's got, in your view, better character, morality, honesty? Raise your hand if you think Donald Trump has better moral character than Joe Biden. Raise your hand. Trump. Okay, raise your hand. Joe Biden. You think he has better character? All right, so Katie's halfway. And raise your hand if you think there's really no difference between them.
Very little.
It'd be interesting if we separated those three. But yeah.
Okay, so all right. I want to ask you about other potential candidates and actual candidates. Gigi mentioned Bobby Kennedy before. What do people think about him? Gigi, you already weighed in. So what do other folks think about Bobby Kennedy? Is he someone you might consider voting for? What do you know about him? What do you like about him? What don't you like about him? Omar, you go.
He's a consideration. Anyone's a consideration, frankly, at this point. He seems to have a decent figures. He comes from a family that has historically done good for the nation. But I don't give him credit just because he's a Kennedy. Like, he has to, again, earn the vote. And I hear a lot of his points. Like, I think he had just had a recent 10-minute public some political advertisement, and he was saying a lot of really relevant things about how we have chronic illnesses off the charts, and how there's just high violence rates and high debt rates, and he's talking about real American problems. Whether he'll do anything about that, he gets to talk about whatever he wants, but he hasn't really proved himself, so it's interesting.
So Omar, would you consider voting for him at this point? Is it on the table for you?
I mean, if he changed his foreign policy stance towards the conflict in Israel, I might.
Okay.
Not right now.
Anyone else? Tell me what you've heard about him, what you think about him, besides Gigi and Omar.
I mean,
I don't really about him.
Go ahead, Virginia.
I don't really know too much about him except for his, he's a Kennedy. I'm assuming a Democrat. My sticking point, and it's going to be opposite of Gigi and Katie, is abortion. I'm for life, and if he's for abortion, that's going to be a sticking point for me. But I would like to hear more about what he stands for and about his policies.
Okay. Other people, what do you know about him? What do you like about him or not like? Go ahead, Nate.
He's pretty hard line on the environment, and I know some people may like that and some may not. To me, it seems like his policies are so strict that I think it's going to further impair business. It's going to raise costs. It's going to create an additional regulatory layer that is gonna hurt us all, in my personal opinion. I haven't really heard a whole lot else about him. I don't know. I think he's a non-starter for me, but I would like to see him in the race, not because I think he's going to be Ralph Nader 2.0, but because I think that it's good to have additional voices out there. I just see too many policies that I think are going to be a continuation of Biden, quite frankly. In economically speaking, I think that he's looking for a blank check from the taxpayer in order to do a lot of these pet projects as far as the environment goes, and I just don't see that as being a worthwhile.
I agree. That's a good point.
If Bobby Kennedy's on the ballot in your state, and it appears that he's doing well enough in the polls to win, raise your hand if you possibly might vote for him based on what you know. Possibly might vote for him if you were on the ballot in your state.
Yeah.
Raise them up, keep them up, because you got some indecisiveness. All right, so 5-ish, 6-ish. Okay. Who else can name anybody else who might be running or is running for president?
Cornell West, Jill Stein, let's go.
Jill, yeah.
All right, Omar's got it down. What do folks think about those options? Anybody attracted to that kind of option?
I don't know that America is ready for a female president yet.
I disagree.
I disagree about it, but
I disagree about
that.
I mean, Hillary was a great option. I mean, she was somebody
Hillary was not a great option.
I don't agree with Hillary Clinton, but that anything's possible.
Why did you
just thinking in general
with a lady being president?
I don't
I
have a
can't
problem
see
with a
it.
lady being president. I think that anything's possible. I just didn't agree with Hillary Clinton option. But
Oh, you said Hillary. Oh,
With
Just
me,
raise your
Sean.
hand if you think voting for someone besides Trump or Biden is basically a waste of the vote. Raise your hand if you think that's a wasted vote.
Ugh.
Anybody think
What do you
that?
mean by waste?
that,
Well,
they're
you
not going
just
to
you
pay
define
attention
it.
to it
You define
anyway.
it.
I
Okay.
feel
All
like
right.
they make us like you're made to feel that way, which is the
Yes,
problem. It's
most
the problem. And that's
definitely.
why people will not vote a lot of times for the
And
other
that's
candidate
going to be the
because
problem.
Right.
I
Yeah,
used to live in
it's
I used to live in Montana, and like the election was already done by the time I voted, basically. Like it was a bummer, so that's why I feel, that it's kind of a wasted.
I'm gonna have to disagree. I lived in Texas and I felt very much the same way many of the years that I lived there. But
Yeah.
because it's a foregone conclusion, I actually felt like voting for a third party gave me a lot of power and agency because it was a vote of disapproval for the status quo.
That's a good way to think
Okay.
of it.
Thank you for saying that.
I want to come back.
Yeah.
I want to come back to a couple issues here, and we're getting close to the end, and just want to make sure it types some loose ends. A couple issues have come up. First, a few of you mentioned abortion rights is an important
Yeah.
issue to you. I'm wondering again how important it is to you, and whether it could be decisive for you in the end in terms of how you vote. Raise your hand if abortion is one of the top issues for you in this election. Raise your hand if it's one of the top issues. All right, so four of you. Let's start with Virginia. You said you supported pro-life. So could Joe Biden win your vote, even though he supports abortion rights?
That's the hard thing. That is the struggle for me. Like I think Joe Biden is a little more compassionate maybe than Trump, but then at the same time, I don't feel that as a country we should say it's okay to murder babies. I have a really strong I just feel really bad even allowing. So because of my beliefs, yeah.
Okay, and Gigi, you have the opposite point of view regarding abortion and the law. So could you see yourself voting for Donald Trump, who's responsible for overturning Roe versus Wade?
I mean, I could. It's an important issue for me, but it's not like it's not just black and white as like I'm pro-life or not pro-life. Like, I think there's limits. I think that abortion can be used inappropriately. And I think that being flat out, like letting states just totally ban it without there being like proper exceptions for medical incest, rape, that is dangerous. I think it's a really hard issue for me. It's hard for me to say that this is one of the biggest hangups for me, I would say, in voting.
For me, it's more about women's rights and not about whether I'm pro-life or it's about giving women the opportunity to make that decision. And it goes back to what Gigi said. There's so many extended circumstances that haven't been taken into consideration. It's not just black and white. You can't just say no, we're not going to do it, and then a mother's life is at risk because of a pregnancy, and you're not going to allow that to that's where I struggle with it's not black and white.
And I think women's rights and just medical rights too, like they're both really important. Like flat out, just having your own medical rights, your own like authority over your body, and not having the state or the government tell you what you can and can't do with your body. Period.
Okay, Kim.
I look at it in a lot of different ways, but biblically, we're not supposed to, kill. So that's my strongest and not wanting it to, go on. But also, as Gigi said, if it's some incest or someone got raped, that's a hard thing for certain people to be able to handle. So, I'm like, there should be limits, but at the same time, you got a lot of young people out here just popping babies and killing them and killing them and killing them. And that's sad,
Okay. And Nate, thank you, Kim. Nathan.
I think Gigi touched on it a little bit, but I think the idea that the government being the ultimate arbiter of our healthcare and our bodies is terrifying. I mean, they do such a poor job of everything else. I do not want the government having say over my body, my wife's body, or any of your bodies. And it's just terrifying to think that we're going to go down this road of certain allowances, but then the government is deciding what those allowances are, and I'm deeply concerned with how involved they're going to get into vetting those reasons for each individual. I think that's really terrifying to think about.
Okay, I want to ask you one more question about immigration. You all said before that you thought President Biden's record on the economy, you pretty much settled on it, and if he did anything different, you'd attribute it to the election year. Do you feel that way about immigration? Or if he made some changes in his immigration policy now, do you think that could win back some of your confidence in him to handle the issue?
I don't know how I feel about that, because even with the statement of the governor, and encouraging us to open up our homes to immigrants, but we have a large percentage of homeless people who are still homeless, and they're giving homes to immigrants. I'm not saying that they don't need a space, but we have homeless people who are already here, who need assistance, who need funding, and they're giving away free things to immigrants and not helping the homeless.
Don't be the devil's advocate here, but a lot of those homeless people, I still have property in California, and a lot of those homeless people do not want to be housed because they don't want to follow the rules. So, I mean, I feel for anybody, if they're given the opportunity as a homeless person, to get the same benefits that we're offering, these people coming in across the borders, then great. But I can't weigh, homelessness against immigration, because to me, they're completely separate.
That's a good point, Katie. I think that the thing with immigration is they both have pretty strong, we want to mitigate foreign immigration, especially through the southern border. It's become a hot button issue, and Biden and Trump, frankly, in my opinion, take very similar stances with regards to that. They were both putting kids in cages back on the southern border. It's like, how different are they? At the end of the day, what I want to see is someone who really addresses the speed to get from kind of first step of legal immigration status to a legal American citizen, or at least you're here on some visa or whatever while you go through the process. But they need to have a better vetting system on a quicker time frame to kind of tackle legal immigration and make it more feasible. And at the same time, we got to keep the people who shouldn't be here out, and that's that's just something.
I think Amara is 100% correct on that. It needs to be a faster process, and there needs to be restrictions. We do want to let people in. We do want to help people as a country, but you can't just let anybody walk through.
I think that there's a lot of specters being raised about just the danger of immigration. We're a country of immigrants. Some of us don't have to go too far back. And our families were coming here, and personally, I have someone in my family who just got here, only a handful of years ago, and it's just very, very concerning to see people who are so upset with the idea that immigration is what's ruining this country. It's actually, in my opinion, what is making this country great. The diversity of opinion and experience and all of that coming together is what made America great in the first place, and it's what will make America great again.
Great, Janisha?
I agree with that. It's just there needs to be boundaries. You can't just have open borders. I think that's just really the difference. I 100% agree with that.
I just want to say I don't have a problem with immigration. I think what someone was saying earlier about it being legal immigration, I think I'm okay with that, as long as they're going through all the proper procedures and everything to become a citizen. I think that's fine. I think it should be open. I just have an issue with the illegal immigration, and then try to get the citizens to open up their homes and giving them free resources when they haven't went through the proper resources to become legal. That's the issue I have, because you do have to be careful about who you let in. There's a lot of human trafficking, especially with children and women, and you really want to be careful to keep the country safe.
I think the legal system is broken on purpose, though. I think that it's set up to be difficult. It's set up to be expensive. It's a source of revenue for the government, and they know that there's a never-ending stream of people who would want to come here legally. They know there's a never-ending stream of people who will pay to come here legally. and they are just keeping the system broken on purpose. And there is no will on Republicans or Democrats side to fix it because it's actually doing what they want it to do, which is unfortunate.
I agree.
I want to go around and ask you all for one sentence. If you were asked by President Biden, he called you up and said, Virginia, I really want to win your vote. What do I need to do to win your vote? I want to know what you would say to President Biden. What's the thing he could do to win your vote, Virginia?
It would be to be pro-life.
Okay. Sean, what would you tell President Biden he needs to do to win your vote?
To be a better leader.
Okay. Nathan?
Stop spending money.
Okay. Gigi?
That's the big one.
Stop spending money. Take accountability for
Okay.
the economy.
Omar?
Stop giving Israel carte blanche to bomb my family.
Okay. Kim?
Just take notes. Start taking notes and keep up with what's going on. Pay attention to what's really going on.
Okay. Katie, what would you tell President Biden how he could win your vote?
Be present.
Okay. Tanisha?
Be more informed about what's going on. Maybe have some better people around now so he can become a better leader.
Same question about President Trump. Gigi, I'll start with you. What would you tell President Trump? Said, Gigi, I really want to win your vote. What can I do? What would you tell him?
Keep your mouth shut. Be compassionate.
Okay.
Be like a little empathetic, compassionate.
Okay. Omar?
I was thinking something similar. Have a heart. It's like be more decent.
Okay. Okay. Kim?
Get your neck back.
Get your neck back?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's cruel.
When you're doing too much and you're not caring, just sit back, 'cause you got a lot of great
Katie?
points.
Just because
Katie?
you think it doesn't mean you should say it.
Right.
Okay. Nathan?
Sit your neck back.
Nathan?
I think get in touch with the real American people. I don't believe you.
Tanisha, what would you? Tanisha, what would you tell President?
Hire a better PR team so he can learn how to communicate better with everyone to bring the country together, not divide it.
There you go.
Sean?
Everything that comes into your head doesn't have to come out of your mouth.
Okay. And Virginia?
Be kind and promote peace.
Yes.
Very grateful to all of you for making time and for being so generous with your points of view. You are, as I say, VIVs, very important voters because of where you live and how thoughtful you are. And thank you all. Have a great evening and very grateful.
Thank you, Mark.
for making
Appreciate the time, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Third time I've watched it, and I learned something every time. And I'm really heartened by the comments from all of you. And I loved watching it with all of you and reading the comments. We've got about an hour left to spend with each other and lots of good people to weigh in and going to get to all of you. The first thing I want to do, taking a little bit of a risk because it's asking for discipline. If you've got questions about the process of the focus group, if you've got questions about that, I'd like to answer them now. So does anybody have any questions about the process of the focus group? Maybe you don't, but if you do, I'd like to answer those right now while that's sort of fresh in everybody's mind. All right, if you do, raise your hand. I want to get some initial reactions to the group, and I'm going to start with former Congressman Vin Weber. So Vin, if you could turn your camera and mic on in a moment. I'll tell you the reaction that I had when I first watched it and was reinforced by the comments that some of you made is President Biden, it appears bad news for him because on the economy, on some of the other issues, projecting strength, clear loser with this group, on who understands your problems, a tie, which would make Scranton Joe crazy. But to me, the sort of bottom line of this is good news for Joe Biden because he should be politically dead given how this group feels, and yet he's not. So, former Congressman Vin Weber, I'd love thank you for joining us, just your overall view of what you took away from this group.
I thought it was a good group, and not to blow too much smoke your way, I thought you conducted it well.
Thank you.
Asked questions that I might have asked myself. I thought you did well with them. It seems to me, I would not be quite as optimistic for the president as your comment was. It seems to me that the only thing that really resonated in his favor was that they don't like Trump personally. I think we know that. But on everything else about what's affecting their lives, no matter how strongly Trump feels or Biden feels that he's doing a good job, they don't see that. And that's going to be very, very hard to change between now and the fall. So I don't quite agree with you that it was a better commentary.
But if I told you take the names off it, and we were doing a political science class, and I told you in this group they overwhelmingly, even the ones who voted for candidate A last time, overwhelmingly thought one candidate was better on the economy, so much so that they laughed at the notion that there was a choice. So much better on the immigration, a top issue. So much better on keeping America safe. Who would they be for? Wouldn't you say most of the 8 would be for that guy?
Yeah, I would say that. You're right. You're right.
So to me, again, you half empty, half full. No doubt the president team would come away from this focus group concerned, but to me, the fact that they're in it, including with 3 people who voted for Trump last time, better than it could have been, as far as I'm concerned. So
I want to make 2 more comments,
yes, sir,
Mark. I'll try to make it brief. First of all, I was the abortion answers across the board made me feel angry at the Republican Party and the pro-life movement, of which I am and how badly they have bungled this issue. Abortion is still a major negative for the Republicans, but based on the answers that we got from people around there, including Gigi, who said that abortion was one of her major issues, they really are not in favor of a pro-choice position. They're in favor of a more mixed position, but the Republican Party bungled it away badly, and it's going to be useful to the Democrats in this election as it was in the last election.
I want you to make your next point, and then we're going to bring my colleague Lauren Leader in to talk about abortion. But go ahead.
Make it quickly, and I'll piss off a few people on the call. I thought a lot of the comments that I heard were sort of condescending.
The comments from the citizens were condescending?
From the participants, not from the participants.
You mean in the chat? The comments in the chat.
The comments in the chat. Pardon me. Yep, the comments in the chat. I thought they were a little bit condescending. Pardon.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm a little reluctant to deconstruct all that just because it's down a rabbit hole. But
yeah,
I
agree.
But I appreciate the point. I think I get your point, and we can talk about that. But I do like the part of what 2 Way is about is the community here to participate, and and so I don't want to stifle that. But I do take your point. And look, we have people on that chat and on this Zoom and on this 2 Way who are very liberal and who watched that focus group and said, I can't believe they're considering voting for Donald Trump. And we have people on here who are very oriented against Joe Biden and for Donald Trump who said, how could these people not be for Donald Trump given what they think of Joe Biden? That's part of why I like this. That's part of what this community is about. And I think given that, you could say condescending, you could say rude, you could say dismissive. Given that, I thought it was a model of civility under those circumstances.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate.
No, I know. I wasn't disagreeing with you. I was just making that point. All right. Someone will tell me when Lauren is ready to go, because I believe she's not quite there. She is. Okay, so here comes Lauren. We're going to get Lauren in as soon as she can turn on her camera. And someone tells me Lauren has popped up. Lauren, if you can turn on your camera, that'd be great. If not, I'll just ask you. Vin just talked about abortion, and his takeaway on the abortion was that the Republicans have messed this up. I'd love to know what your takeaway was for the abortion portion.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah.
There you go.
Hi, I didn't know you were all waiting for me. Such bated breath. Thanks. Hi, Mark. Yeah, I mean, sorry. So where to start? Look, I think what was interesting is as soon as they sort of got pushed a little bit, the conversation became a little bit more direct, and clearly most of the group, does support abortion rights, even those that identify themselves as pro-life. And I think that's really what we're seeing across the country is that people who have had these very closely held views about, anti-abortion views over many years are also realizing because of the stories of women getting close to death or other horrible stories that are coming out of the states where abortion has been banned, are starting to realize that without exceptions, even for those who believe that abortion is not moral and hold pro-life views, they're starting to really do question these extreme bans.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. Stay with us as long as you can. Tim Hogan, who's also a part of the extended two-way family. Also, I think, Tim, you've got something you want to say about abortion. Am I right about that, Tim?
Yeah. Sorry, just unmuting here.
That's all right.
I mean, I think what's interesting about the focus group on abortion is, and what makes me feel good as a Democrat and as Vin is as frustrated with Republicans about, is making that connection that if that issue is a huge stake for these voters, direct blame for the situation that we're in right now being held with Donald Trump is a connection that some of those voters need to make. I mean, we talk about how they talked about how the government shouldn't be involved in these types of decisions. It feels uncomfortable that there's overreach on the issue of abortion. I'm thankful that Democrats are going to hammer this, and I think Arizona yesterday is a perfect example of over and over and over again, no matter what Donald Trump says, they're going to lay at his feet, and he proclaims it that he struck down Roe v. Wade and he's proud of it. But what's happening in the states is a result of his policy, and we should also doubt whether or not, whether unlikely, but whether or not he would sign an abortion ban if it came to his desk, he would do it. And so I think for these undecided voters, it's an indication again that connection between the stakes and how Biden is different than Trump on this. You kind of assume if you're a political junkie that everybody knows that, but that's something that the Biden campaign has to do, and I know why they're doing it.
So you're saying they need to do more of it, and they need to do it better, or both?
I think they need to do more of it. I think they're doing it well. I think some of the paid advertising that they've gone up with, particularly the woman who suffered from sepsis recently, like that's the type of advertisement that has to be out there. And that direct connection to Donald Trump has to be in that advertising. I think they're on the right track.
Right. I want to bring David Burrell back in. And if we could bring up the poll, I want to talk about the question about abortion in the poll, page 8. David, I don't know if hopefully you have the poll in front of you, but again, this is a poll of the same group, undecided voters in the 3 states. And the question on abortion asks Biden versus Trump, whose policies most closely match your views on abortion. Biden ahead by 22 points in this group, 46% to 24%. So there you see the data. You can take the poll down. David, I'm just wondering, again, we know that that's in line with what this group was like. It's also in line with voters overall, right? At least directionally, more pro-choice than pro-life. But as Vin and others have suggested, it's not as black and white as that. So I'm just wondering what you think about this abortion issue, since it's one that Democrats are counting on so much, and it's one of the few in your poll and in others where the Democrat has the advantage.
Well, I'll start off by saying that strategically, I actually agree with everything that was just said the last 3 minutes. I think that that was right on point if they want to capitalize on this issue. And this is one of the issues that through this undecided group, who did look a lot like the Midwest demographically when we did the polling, this is also one of the issues that polled a lot like the rest of the country. And what was interesting to me is that, when we asked other questions, even with the group, was this one of your top 3 issues? Because that's something we asked. We did get the top 3 issues of the people who were on that call, on that focus group. And I think 4 of them listed it in the top 3 issues with the vote on, and 2 of them in the top 2. So I think that is, something that, like you're saying, Mark, is definitely a strength. And when you look at the fact combined with, to pick up on a couple other things we talked about here, but the majority of these people, we may go to this in a little bit, but more of these people did vote, or more of the undecideds did vote for Joe Biden back in 2020. Abortion is a top 3 issue with a number of them. Combined with the fact, which I think we need to talk about too, that they just really don't like Donald Trump. And I don't know about anyone here, but I have friends, like if you ask me, well, why is this guy truly undecided? I'm like, oh, he just really doesn't like Donald Trump. I'm talking about personal people I know. I think that's something that, Mark said, we learn something every time we rewatch this. And that's what kept running through my head every single time is sometimes is that big of a thing?
Yeah.
So anyways.
David, can I ask a question about the data? Because I looked at the polls and you don't have gender, even though you show that the polling participants were about 50-50 male-female, you don't break down any of these results by male-female, or at least not in the poll summary that I saw, which by the way is a pet peeve of mine. I don't know what gender break is. It's not, it doesn't matter unless we know what's male, female, in my view. But so what was that number? I'm assuming that a huge part of that gap was driven by women voters.
Yeah, and that's something that, Mark, I can provide. We'll get the crosstabs for the key demographics and provide out to group. And I don't disagree with you. I can't stand to read any poll that doesn't provide the crosstabs as well. So income.
Well, the gender breaks on this issue are so fundamental.
Right.
I mean,
While you two talk, sorry, Lauren, while you two talk, go ahead and put up the slides again. Put up page 15 on abortion legality, just so you can see, again, in the poll that runs parallel to the focus group, 70% of the people in the poll thought abortion should either be legal in all cases or legal in most cases. And again, that's a pretty overwhelmingly pro-choice point of view. Lauren, sorry, keep going.
No, not at all. I mean, look, I think that is, and when you look at the gender breaks, I mean, the gender breaks on these issues become even more dramatic. Women under 40, it's like 80-90% of them believe that abortion should be legal in most or all cases. And even, and the other factors so when we pull on this, we usually ask not just, is it your top 3 issue, but what are your deal breaker issues? In other words, what are the issues that you would never vote for someone unless they agreed with you? And abortion for the last year and a half, and this is before Arizona, we haven't done it since Arizona or Florida, abortion was the top deal breaker issue for women, right? So it's not just that it's a top issue, it's that they will not vote for someone if they don't agree with them on that.
Yeah, although Lauren, to me, my biggest takeaway on abortion from this, and we didn't hear from all 8 participants, but people think about abortion as such a passionate issue, and you had 3 women who spoke up who were passionate, 2 pro-choice, 1 pro-life, and yet that wasn't driving them towards a definitive vote, right? They're undecided, even though you had a pro-life woman who's still undecided. You had 2 pro-choice women who were still undecided. So it's an emotional issue for them. It's an important issue, but not determinative, at least not for those 3.
Well, you asked a great question when you asked them, what would give you, what would make you vote for Biden? And all the women did say that the abortion issue was the thing that would tip the scale for them, right? So they're undecided to a certain degree. But then when you ask that very, very smart question, that I thought rose to the top in a really interesting way.
Yeah. So as we go forward with the project, we're going to have different groups, right? Always undecided, always in these 7 states. But for instance, one interesting conversation might be, and Dave and I haven't talked about this one, but 4 pro-choice women and 4 pro-life women who are undecided from Wisconsin, say. To me, that could be a pretty interesting conversation because, again, if they identify themselves somewhat passionately as one or the other, and yet they're still undecided, I think puts in sharper relief how the issue's playing. Not as black and white, as Vin and others have said, not as black and white as sometimes it's cast in the press. Let me just look at my schedule here because I don't want to lose Tim because I think Tim has to go relatively soon. So Tim, let's talk now a little bit about the economy. And again, Lauren and David are staying with us, and Vin and others feel free to chime in. And pretty soon we're going to open it up to the whole floor, so please be ready to raise your hand and ask questions. Tim, I'd love to hear from you on the economy. I think the economy thing to me was the biggest aha moment when, again, they sort of laughed when I tried to say, well, Joe Biden says he is better on the economy. I'm wondering, particularly in light of today's inflation number, I'm wondering where you think the president is on that as a challenge. Is it something he can win without doing better? Must he do better?
I think he needs to close the gap a little. And it is interesting to hear, you get the wide array of human thought with undecided voters in a focus group that you'll never see in a poll, and what it is exactly that people have anxiety about or are blaming Joe Biden for. And you had someone talking about high interest rates. It's not like Joe Biden can just go cut the interest rate. You had someone talking about housing affordability. You had someone talking about how they thought the high rates were affecting the job market in their area, whether or not their job market is improving. I mean, it probably has. I think the Biden campaign is smart to continue to look back a little bit. You never want to look completely in the rearview mirror. But the message that I think would help resonate with this group is a reminder of where we were. That is not just the good vibes that they felt from the Trump economy, but coming out of the coronavirus pandemic and, reopening the economy and still having the United States in a position that it's doing better than everybody else. That's a monumental task, and it is very hard, and you cannot convince people to feel good when they don't feel good. So I think part of the hope is, and yeah, the number was not today, but part of the hope is that we see some economic indicator trajectory where there is improvement, and it's just got to get better by November. There's only so much you can do, unfortunately, and I do think he has to close the gap. I think there is an ability to do it a little bit, but it would worry me.
Lauren, and then David, love to just hear your kind of top line thoughts on the economy.
I mean, I just think the interest rates, until interest rates come down, like it is just such a personal issue for people, the lack of housing and housing affordability right across the country. And people are going to blame Biden for it. It's not its fault. We know that the US economy is the strongest in the world right now. It had the best recovery of any nation in the world after the pandemic. People clearly still don't really care about that. And they don't feel it because of because of the interest rate issue, which after today isn't looking like it's going anywhere as quickly as we thought it might before the fall. So I thought the participants had very interesting things to say about the economy, that he seems to be in denial about what people are experiencing. I got to say, I kind of agree with him on that. I mean, it's the push-pull of like needing to sell your accomplishments, but trying to sell it even though people don't believe it and they don't feel it, and trying to have compassion for the things that aren't working. It's a tough one for him. Yeah. And it's part of why I think it's going to ultimately not be the winning issue in this.
I do think one thing, just really quickly, that the Biden campaign can do, they did a little bit in the State of the Union, it always polls well for Democrats, is you see some of these voters talking about how they still view Trump as the businessman. He's the business guy, even if he doesn't identify with issues that my family has, he's going to improve the economy, and that's ultimately going to be good for me, is the fact that if he comes back into office, tax cuts for the wealthiest are back on the agenda or going to be extended. That always polls well. It would be very interesting to see if voters are, as they're forward looking, is there anything that's anathema in the Trump economic agenda that he has on the table that would turn them off versus, well, it felt kind of good back in 2018.
Right.
And if he gets to hold on to that, that's bad.
I'll throw out childcare too, which is something that he does have the potential to control in terms of making greater investments and on inflationary costs. That's another one that's very personal for people.
David, hold on one second, because Amy Parnes, our colleague here at Two-Way, has joined, and I know she is passionate about the economic piece of this. So Amy, I turn the floor over to you to explain your reaction to the economic portion of the talk and of the poll.
I mean, I got chills, Mark, when I watched that. Everyone raised their hand. We've all seen the polls. People are now concerned about the economy. I think the economy is going to be the issue that decides this election. And if this many people are undecided, feel the way they do, that is highly problematic for Joe Biden. And I think the campaign needs to take it into high gear if they want to turn this around. They only have a limited amount of time to do that before this narrative sticks. And I think it's a huge problem for him at the moment.
Yeah, the part that got to me was not the hand raise so much as when I followed up and some of them laughed at just the mere prospect of the question when I suggested, well, is it possible that Joe Biden would be better for your family's finances? I thought for a while that that's the key question, both in the polls and then we saw it here. Everybody stand by. I want to bring in some questions from folks who've got their hands up, and have Tim and Lauren and Amy and David address them. So, question or comment, as always, please turn on your camera if you want to ask a question. Raise your electronic hand. We love comments. We love questions. We do not love long soliloquies, so everybody can get a chance to talk. So one of my favorite people in Hall of America, the man whose screen name likes to say MRB. Unmute yourself, please, my friend, and go ahead.
Hey, Mark, again, great job. Just masterclass as always. But what struck me was,
Matthew, tell everybody who you are just so they know.
Matthew Bartlett from New Hampshire. Have been in politics for a while. Worked in Republican politics, worked for the one campaign, was actually a Trump appointee at the State Department, resigned on January 6th, of a bipartisan firm now. I'm here in Sin City, DC. And what I didn't hear was a lot of, DC talk. None of what seemed to be the president's, or the administration, the campaign's talking points. No democracy talk, no January 6th talk. They could not answer, I believe, correctly any of the charges that Trump has, nor could they nor could they, even say that it matters to them.
Yeah.
I guess,
Matthew,
is there
Matthew, all 8 of them said the charges were politically motivated. The timing, at least, was politically motivated, which I also thought was so interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
shocking to me. And then beyond that, no accomplishments. I think Tim, even Lauren highlighted this, coming out of the presidency, is the power of the incumbency gone? And is this going to be, maybe with the exception of abortion, a referendum election? I guess that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Great question. Any of you want to address that?
Well, just real quickly, what I thought was interesting though about the complaints about Trump, and maybe we didn't hear January 6th directly. I don't think anyone said January 6th.
Came up once.
Yeah. But it's such a litany of personality that makes him feel disqualifying. He's a bully. They don't trust him as a leader. He's divisive. They're not comfortable with him having access to the nukes. They feel bad about January 6th. Whereas there may be some stickiness on Biden on the economy, it is amazing to hear how many different versions of "we just feel like Trump is sort of a madman" are reservations for these folks. And so I think that's interesting, and I think
and yet, Tim, they know that about him, and yet they still might vote for him.
And they still might, but these are undecided voters. They're going to be undecided until the very end. This is the human nature for these people. But it gives me a little comfort that there is a wide variety of things for them to pick there. Just very quickly on the charges, it's so interesting to see this focus group not really reflect what we see in some other polls, and maybe it's because it's more focused on undecided voters. But we've heard from independent voters that if he was charged, that would raise serious concerns for them. So seeing everyone here kind of dismiss them was
well, and even among a swath of Republican voters as well. I mean, I think that's what you saw in the 30% that Nikki Haley was able to peel off in a lot of really critical places around the country were Republicans who said that they were deeply uncomfortable with his track record, that they would never vote for somebody who was convicted. I mean, all of the rest of it. And I think I hate to be a bit of a wet noodle here, Mark, because I do think it's really important to talk to undecided voters. On the other hand, it is also, you probably said this at the top, the percentage of Americans that are undecided is pretty small in most places around the country, right? They don't have, there's no question that if, for instance, we wind up seeing, a big surge for RFK Jr. and third parties, that there are always scenarios in which these small slices of the electorate, like the undecideds, have an outsized impact, right? But I think on the totality of it, women are the majority of the voters. They outvote men in every election and have since 1980. And across the board, every single poll since Dobbs has shown that very few women are undecided. I mean, kudos to you guys for finding a few of them. But, there are very few of them. And I think there are very few Americans who are undecided.
Yeah.
So, not to say this isn't important. I think it is. But in the grand context of whether, these undecided voters really have an outsized role in what the outcomes of the election is, we don't know yet.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I know David wants to get in. I want David to get in to talk about some of the issues that were just raised. I will say, polls that have independents, right? Most of those independents are not independents. They're Republicans who call themselves independents or Democrats who call themselves independents. What's different about what we're doing is we're finding people who truly are undecided and not just independents. And so the point of view may well be different. David.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, two things. One is I think that if you want to quantify the impact that these voters may have on the election, and there were some comments, sometimes they don't vote. And so, but that's still something too if they voted last time. And we had 3 who voted for Trump last time, 3 who voted for Biden, 1 who did not vote, and then another who voted third party. Just to kind of restate that, I know it was actually in the focus group. But we did as we did this survey, we were using random sampling techniques into voter files, right? So we weren't doing a lot of modeling and targeting, saying how do we find an undecided voter? So what was great about that is we could start to see what percentage of the population it did make up. And so, depending on the state, the truly undecideds were really 6% on average. So you can start to think, okay, well, you're talking 6%. We asked numerous questions because it wasn't just, are you truly undecided, you have no idea. We did allow in another probably 3% who were slight leans, but not probable, not probably about Trump. And then we rescreened them to say, hey, are you truly conflicted, right? Are you truly conflicted on who to vote for? And this is in the polling survey. And that added about another 3%. Now it may be as high as 10, but that's really what we're talking about 6% truly undecided in this region, right? And amongst voters here. So that should help quantify to add to the point of what this what the impact of this may be in the election.
Yeah, that could be real in a place like Wisconsin or Michigan, or those other places.
Yeah, or all these other places. Let's bring in a question, comment. Doug Carey, if you could unmute. Go ahead, Doug Carey.
Thank you, Mark. I've wondered if you or David have a sense as to how truly representative these undecided voters are in the general electorate. And unlike MRB, I actually thought they're pretty knowledgeable. They talked about the nuances of the weaponization of the Justice Department. They talked about the delay of justice. They seem to have some degree of familiarity with Biden's and Trump's position on a whole host of issues. I wonder if the average person who's undecided, if there is such a person, truly has that familiarity. Most of my friends who are not political junkies like I am wouldn't have that deep knowledge.
Yeah, David, what do you think of that?
That is a good question, right? And I think that's something we're going to test. And there's a couple comments in here that we'll do some follow-up on about what news source that they access. Now, the attendees, we have that some from their screening. On the polling, we have that some from we didn't actually ask that in this poll. We will in the future. And so I think that'll provide some additional insights into that. If we can see the actual level at which they're engaging in media and where that media is coming from. And so that's something we'll probably try to provide as we move forward in the future, and even some from this one. I will say they are representative of the different types of voices. We were happy with the mix we had. When you're looking at a focus group, you don't want it to make it perfectly representative, because then it would have been 80%. I mean, well, we would have not even had anyone of color, because that region is so white, and you would have maybe one person of color, right? So we wanted to make sure that we got something representative of the different voices, as opposed to something that's actually fully representative of the population. And so it was successful in that. And to answer your question, I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm not sure, because we've never done a focus group of actual undecided voters before, because there's such a small percentage of the population in a race like this. Now, if we go in a congressional race, or you go into even a gubernatorial race, people know a lot less about the candidates and so forth. So, I mean, it's something to look into, and something maybe we can start asking some questions and maybe tease out for the next one.
Yeah. Lauren, I want to address what you said about the Undecideds in a point that I've been thinking a lot about since we started this project. You can think of a focus group as about strategy and tactics, right? Like, what could the Biden campaign take away from this to try to help their chances, the Trump campaign? You can think about it as an academic exercise. The way I think about it sort of most intensely is what's going on in the minds of our fellow citizens. Because they're kind of the most distilled version of the anguish, the ambivalence, the confusion that a lot of Americans who know who they're going to vote for have. In other words, there are a lot of people who are going to vote for Donald Trump who detest Donald Trump and have the same feelings as these undecided voters do. There are a lot of people who are going to vote for Joe Biden who don't think he's going to survive a second term, and they don't want Kamala Harris to be president. But they're definitely going to vote Joe Biden. And I think what this group and the subsequent groups will do is give us a richer insight into that sensibility to understand the country, because this is going to be a very tough year for almost everybody because of the ambivalence, because most people don't think these are the two best possible candidates we could have as the main choices. Rob Kenna, unmute, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. One of the things I would do is I would broaden the undecided voters and talk in terms of the lightly decided voters, those who are feeling meh about their candidate and never going to vote for the other guy, but instead just, screw it, I'm not going to the poll at all. And I could easily see that the turnout is going to be substantially less than last time, which is historically high. And because of that, Trump lost.
David?
Yeah, so, as we kind of move forward, this is the type of feedback we need too, because Mark and I talked about this the first time he called me on this project. And I was like, it's not, yes, undecideds are going to tell those voices will tell a lot of the story, but there's other voices that are going to tell the story. And they are also hard to reach voices of people who might actually stay home, who usually vote. We've also discussed even, I'm very interested in since 2020, how has the electorate changed in Georgia with all the new movers there? I just want to do one of new mover voters in Georgia. Or how has Michigan changed? Because I think that is something that people are not paying attention to as well. That I think the electorate's gotten, just by people moving, migration patterns, gotten a lot more further Democratic. Those are some of the populations that, yes, we say undecided, as people will continue to do, hopefully. but that, we can kind of start dipping into these ideas and like what other voices and little groups that we would go get will tell the story of the election.
Lauren,
Right, the
and then Amy.
enthusiasm. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that's why we always ask about how committed people are to voting. Like, are you definitely going to vote or not? And like the enthusiasm about it. And there's no question, like we've been seeing higher enthusiasm among Republicans. We've definitely seen that for the last year or so. They're motivated to get out and vote for the Trump supporters are motivated to get out and vote for him. But I think what's harder to parse, again, back to like beating my dead horse here, which is don't underestimate the rage of women. And I think we've seen that now in the last multiple cycles, really since 2017, right? Since Trump has been elected, he's been thwarted, except the one time he was elected in 2016, he has been thwarted at every single subsequent election by angry women who turned out and across the generations turned out. And that is because they are overrepresented in the voting population. And by the way, Black women are the most likely to be registered to vote and the most likely to turn out of any group of voters in the country. And they have been extremely active and are pretty uniformly, like by 90+% Democrats. So I think these are the dynamics that, the sheer numbers. Yes, obviously a low turnout election is bad for Biden, but I continue to believe that women are so fired up and have been since 2017 that they can continue to tip the scales.
I think that's true. But I think also the economy, like I said before, is going to be the issue. And that should be, I think that's what's worrying the campaign right now. It's what's worrying Biden. He's been upset about the polls recently. He has told aides he's been upset about them. So I think they're realizing that when it comes down to the economy, this is going to be the end game. And so that's why I think you're seeing them try to do that. I think immigration also, they've bungled it up until now. I think that's a huge issue that Republicans have seized on. And I think if it's about the economy and immigration, if the election were held today, and I've done reporting on this, even Democrats admit that Trump will win. So they have a lot of work to do. I think they know. I think that's why you're seeing the president taking action on immigration and on the border. He knows that there's work to do there. He knows that he has to communicate the economy a little bit better. There have been so many wins for Democrats, and yet people aren't feeling them. These are all things that they have to do better on, and they know it. They acknowledge that and I think that they're going to continue to have to do so and turn this narrative around. I know Democrats love to say that there is so much time left on the clock, but really these narratives begin to stick and they take hold, and you're seeing that time and again in polls, in this focus group, and I think that's worrisome for a lot of people.
And
I always thought they came to this too late, like way too late.
And if the president's team thinks the trial are going to bail them out, this group suggests not going to happen. Douglas Workman.
I'm an undecided voter, but I live in a state where my vote's irrelevant.
That's why you didn't get called to be in our group.
The group seemed to me to do a pretty good job of focusing on Trump's weaknesses, which is Trump, the character issue, his irrationality, his pettiness, that all seemed to come out in that. The question for Biden that I didn't hear a lot of was the cognitive issue, the fact that he's 82 years old and he's got a vice president that, at least what I read, doesn't poll with a degree of trust if she were to come into power. So, where does that cognitive issue kind of fit into this?
There were some references to it, and I did not hammer on it, but there were some references to it. I'd love, first, David, what your thoughts on that are.
Well, the couple of things we did here were, you kind of got some iffy hands raised on if this would make you less likely to vote for him. But no one said it was a deal breaker. Maybe someone did. I can't remember, but I'm not sure anyone said it was actually a deal breaker. I think maybe 3 or 4 kind of did the half hand raise, which was interesting to see on that. We definitely didn't ask anything. I don't think we asked too much related to the vice president, but so I know that this is, I think it more contributes to this, the thematic, message that we heard from both of them is they don't like either candidate. But when they're going to talk about personal issues. They're going to talk about Trump's a little bit more. And I think
Yeah.
we definitely saw that in the group. And they won. And that's something important about focus groups is like, where do they end up leading the conversation sometimes? And so they got an opportunity to talk about the personal negatives for Biden in relationship to his age. Mark gave him that opportunity. And it just didn't really take on. But when Trump came up and they talked about maybe some of the personal things, it became a big conversation. A lot of personality came out. And that doesn't tell you anything quantitatively, but it can also help inform some of the stuff we may go ask in our next poll, because we'll be back in the field polling undecideds soon. So it's good for you to hear people's questions about that.
Amy, in the last 24 hours, we've seen a presidential interview, although he did it last week and they held it, I don't know why, for several days, and a press conference. What's your sense now within the president's team amongst congressional Democrats about how he's doing addressing the questions about his acuity?
They felt better about it after the State of the Union, and you and I discussed that with the group at the time. But then I think that it's returned to where it was, and there is some skepticism about among Democrats. I talked to one Democrat today who said that there is this consensus among strategists and other people that he's going to have one of these moments, a huge moment between now and the campaign that becomes almost like the talk of the town for weeks and weeks. And that's a big scare for people, that when he hits the campaign trail, when he is, actively campaigning, and they're not doing a lot of campaigning on either side right now. They have like one event each, I think, this week. But when the rubber hits the road and they are going to be out and the campaign's going to be in full swing, that he's going to slip up and there is going to be a moment that gives people a lot of pause. And there is this feeling of worry right now that that is coming and that's around the corner. And then what? How late is too late? And can Kamala come in, the vice president, and save the day? And so, Democrats are bedwetters. I mean, I should say that, but there is this like lingering fear, like what happens if?
Yeah.
And that
the irony is that the disinformation machine around that, which like somehow continues to ignore the like daily crazy gaffes and like nuttiness from Trump, right? Which just seems to like roll off of the news cycle, regardless of what he says. But every time Biden makes a stumble, and he's not a great orator. I was at the White House a few weeks ago. Like, he's not great when he speaks in front of people. Like, he never has been, never gonna be. But yet those things get so amplified in this, this is a thing Trump does extraordinarily well, which is that they make mountains out of those molehills and molehills out of Trump's mountains when he makes those mistakes. It's a pretty impressive, like, disinformation campaign on a lot of this.
Yep. William Cole. Thank you, Lauren. William Cole.
Yes, this question is addressed to Mark and David and whoever else does focus groups. First of all, it's very interesting. It's really changed my mind about some things. But does anybody ever ask about what people think about whether the election was stolen or about the events of January 6th? I know people don't list that as important, but does anybody ever ask about that? And if so, what happens? And if not, why not?
David, go ahead, and then I'll follow.
I have a couple. I have a couple of things on that, and not a great answer for this. Maybe just a couple insights based on some polling we've done, but it is very relevant to that. We have a couple. I do not think that in Undecideds, and this is just me speculating, that is going to be something that for this group makes a difference. Because I mean, just from looking at a lot of polls and doing a lot of polls, I will say something that's interesting on that issue that I wish we had more time to look into as well. Is when we were polling in the battleground states and the competitive congressional districts in 2022, so leading up to probably, let's say call it September and October 2022, threats to democracy was way up there as a list of concerns and as a top 3 issue. I mean, up with like the economy, we were starting to see the inflation coming at that point, and some of the cost of living was going up and all that stuff, but it was way up there and in the 20s at times. And so but since the election was over, it's dropped down to, if you guys say, is this your top issue? It's 5%. Now, that being said, that was the threat to democracy. And that doesn't answer your question about, was it a fair election and election denial and all that type of stuff. But, relevant to things have changed a lot on that subject, and the interest on that subject has waned. I can tell you it hasn't waned when you look at the Republican primaries. It's in every poll that, we poll both. I just know he said this, we poll on both sides. We have a lot of different clients on both sides. And we're always testing that, and someone always gets mad if it's not in a survey. So it's certainly relevant to voters, but don't have a great answer, but there's some, information for you.
Let me give a quick answer, and then I want to bring Noah Rothman, who's joined us, also part of our two-way family, for his sort of broad view of things. And if you've got questions, William Cole, thank you for your question. If you've not asked a question and you'd like to weigh in, please raise your hand. We'd love to get more of you in here before we close. Lots of you made suggestions in the chat about topics to ask about. It's a couple of challenges in doing these, and I've done a lot of them now. One is you've only got 45 minutes or so, and so you can't ask about everything. I didn't ask about China. I didn't ask about fentanyl. There's lots of things I didn't ask about. My view of these is I don't want to cause a fight or tension. I think they're most valuable when the group is kind of all rowing in the same direction. That doesn't mean there isn't any disagreement or discord, but there's nothing I could do to more easily blow up the dynamic between the 8 people than start asking about January 6th. Or an issue like that. And so it's a choice. I'm sure we'll cover it in subsequent episodes of this, but it's not my favorite topic for the style of focus group that I think is most effective. Noah, thank you for joining us. Love to hear your 38,000-foot view of which parts you found most compelling and your thoughts on the concept of poll and focus group together.
Well, if I remember correctly, one of the respondents in the focus group did bring up adjacent issues to January 6th.
One did, yeah.
Yeah, precisely one, which is roughly where I would think the electorate would break down, about 10 to 20% of voters for whom that is top of mind. Another interesting fact that I thought was illuminated by this focus group is something you've been seeing in polls. I haven't necessarily looked at the data around this in a couple of months, but when I was paying very close attention to it late last year, I would say, 2 ideas can exist in the same head when it comes to, frankly, Donald Trump's his comportment, which has landed him in a variety of courtrooms, which is generally one of the biggest problems that voters have with him, his personal conduct. And 2 ideas can exist in the same head. One, that these charges are politically motivated, that the Justice Department is pursuing Donald Trump out of a sense of vengeance, not necessarily a well-founded belief, but nevertheless a persistent impression that is prominent across the board, especially among undecided and independent voters. At the same time, they don't necessarily think the charges aren't true. They don't necessarily believe that Donald Trump is innocent of what he has been charged, even though the DOJ is out to get him and is myopic and motivated by animus. They still kind of think Donald Trump did it.
Even paranoids have enemies.
I mean, that's something that if you're a real dedicated political analyst, observer, follower, those 2 ideas are distinct. They really cannot exist in the same mind, but they can for undecided voters and people who don't pay as deep, close attention, granular attention to the political cycle. And it'll be up to Joe Biden to suss out these threads.
Everyone from this group who weighed in, not everyone did, but most did, everyone fit that mold. They all thought there was political motivation, at least for the timing, and those who weighed in thought he probably did something wrong.
Yeah, so it's just a matter of emphasis when voters go into the voting booth, which of those two beliefs and concerns about who's behaving, more egregiously, which one of those wins out. It'll be up to the campaigns to really highlight the narrative they want to promote.
I just want to stay with this with you and others to weigh in too, because we're on the eve of what might be the only trial. It seems to me that for someone who has those 2 thoughts in their head, in the end, unless the trial produces, and this trial won't be on camera, kind of a searing impression of wrongdoing by Donald Trump, it seems to me that in the end, as I said before, if you're relying on beating Trump by having the trial do your work for you, it seems like this suggests that's not going to happen. For most people, on balance, I would say. Anybody want to comment on that? Perhaps not. Perhaps it's not.
No, I think that's true.
Okay.
But I mean, again, back to what we were saying before, that there certainly were people, and I think you saw this in a lot of the Nikki Haley voters that have said that an indictment would be a deal breaker for them. But these are folks who were already inclined away from him because of the various, legal issues, et cetera. So it's hard to know whether or not it's uncharted territory. We have no idea.
My mind is constantly worrying since Dave and I started talking about this project about subgroups to do. And one I thought about today is people who voted for Nikki Haley in their primary or caucus who are undecided, right?
I'll do that with Mark.
Say again?
I'll do those with you. I want to talk.
All right, you can be part of it. I want Noah to give us one or two more top line thoughts, but while I tee him up, Again, no hands currently raised. The whole point of this community is for you all to get a chance to make comments and ask questions. So there goes Larry's hand up. Thank you for that. Love to get a few more. Bob's physical hand is up, so we'll get to them. Noah, one or two more brief thoughts from you, and then let's get these other questions in.
Yeah, well, and insofar as voters remain very uncomfortable with the state of the economy and their personal finances generally, what they were describing were a set of conditions that Joe Biden cannot address. Inflation rates, the interest rates, the quality and availability of inventory in the housing market. All this is outside Joe Biden's control. Where he's got something going for him is they don't exactly put their finger on why they believe Joe Biden's economy is his fault. None of them identified the Inflation Reduction Act. None of them identified the America Cares Act. None of them identified the infrastructure bill. All the massive spending that the deficit spending that contributed, however marginally or substantially, to rates of inflation exceeding what Donald Trump experienced in 2020 with his congressional efforts.
And even without that backup, they all felt quite emphatic about their view.
So it's an impression. It's something that has become baked in, and there's very little that Joe Biden can do about it. And there was this, talk. Ron Klain caught on this hot mic, made a lot of news, where he was harping on the president for focusing on infrastructure and going to bridges, and nobody cares about bridges. He should talk about the economy more. Well, what's he going to say that's going to allay voters' concerns? What's he going to do that's going to allay voters' concerns? He's in a bit of a bind there. It seems like that impression is pretty well baked in, at least among these undecideds.
Yep.
Mark, I'm going to add a quick comment to that.
Of course.
Just, that was relevant from the poll results. And I think it is going to be a tough issue for him because there's such a conflict to these people from what's from the messaging from the president and the campaign and what they're feeling. So, but that being said, there was some other items in the poll, especially when we asked, generally speaking, who do you trust more on issues? And, the economy is one piece of, your personal finances and the prosperity you're feeling. There are other components of it that, such as healthcare, such as, programs, student loan forgiveness was even brought up, and the loan forgiveness was even brought up. And I think that those, I'm sorry, what I was going to say is that the Democrats performed a lot better, but Republicans trusting Democrats on those issues that are important to your family finances. Democrats performed really well on that. That being said, I think the economy is seen as the biggest one, right? And so I just want to add that in. There was a little additive component.
So David, it's more they can put their finger on stuff they like specifically, but what they don't like is sort of a nebulous impression that they can't really identify a single cause of. It's just a general environmental impression.
Experiential, which are the most important. Like, you can't, if you're experiencing something, it doesn't matter what the messaging is, right? And especially if it's really, hardcore. And that we always see that in polling. Once something comes very experiential, and by the way, the stock market's not really experiential to the most people, right? I mean, it can cause trigger effects, right? And from a negative standpoint, it can end up being, but it's really they're feeling stuff every day, and that's gonna be tough for any messaging to get through. I think he needs to focus on some of those other components that do contribute to your family's prosperity, and then and hope for some wins. If I were in their shoes.
Amy, did you want to say something?
No, I think that when you look at polling, when you looked at that Wall Street Journal poll, for instance, that came out, people already have these fixed views on certain issues, like never mind the top lines, but on the economy, on immigration. They feel the way they feel, even in spite of these trials, in spite of everything going on. They know who Donald Trump is. They know who Joe Biden is. That's the thing. They're both tested right now. They both have experience in the Oval Office, and yet they still feel the way they feel. And so there's this larger question, like, can Donald Trump move past his base? Can he attract these undecideds, these moderates? And as of right now, he's doing that. So I think they need to change course. And I think you're right. I think David's right. It's going to be really hard to do that. But they have had all these wins, and for whatever reason, they haven't been able to say, look, the economy, they should be talking about jobs. A lot of my sources tell me this every day. They should be talking about jobs every single day and hitting that hard, best jobs market in decades, and yet they're not doing that kind of thing. So they're honestly letting Trump and Republicans kind of set this narrative that's going to be really hard to unstick very quickly.
Larry Doris, go ahead.
So most of the electorate has a short memory span, and I can't believe that there's any candidate that has more contradictions on tape than Trump. As that starts to resurface between now and November, does that have any impact on folks' memory as you head towards November?
I mean, I think that's part of what's going to happen. I mean, look, Biden's best campaigning is on ads. He's not great on the stump, and he doesn't connect well with people in that way unless he's in small groups. But his ads could be very powerful. I mean, I think the ad that someone mentioned, the ad that they ran yesterday or this week about the abortion ban in Texas is a powerful one, and I think we're going to see a lot more. He also has a massive financial chest to draw from to run really effective, constant ads for the next 6 months. I think they've been slow out of the gate. And I agree with my colleagues, shame on the Biden campaign for not realizing that they were losing the narrative 3 months ago. Traditional campaigning, which is sort of how they're approaching this, take it, go big in the last 5-6 months. I think it's a problem in the current environment. People have very entrenched views that get reinforced all the time, by the guy who's not in the White House. So I think it's been a mistake. And I hope they start running heavy ads, reminding people about Trump.
Briefly on that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, just briefly, because I got
just because Lauren raised such a great point about abortion and highlighting Donald Trump's inconstancy this week on abortion. He had this big statement saying, basically, I wanted to remand this issue to the states. And when I do so, as he said on Truth Social, federal lawmakers can wipe their hands of the issue. It's a state issue, right? Which everybody who knows abortion politics understands. It's never going to be a state issue. It becomes a national issue right away, even at the state level with the IFV decision. And then we had this Arizona decision. And right away, Donald Trump intervenes in the process and says, well, that Arizona law, I don't like that law. Wait a minute. You were just talking about how this is a federal issue. This is all federalism to you. You remanded it to the states so you could wash your hands of it. And now you're diving right into this controversy. And Democrats, I'm sure, loved it, A, for the inconstancy to remind voters of how Donald Trump behaved in 2020. And B, when Donald Trump is talking about abortion, it's a day Democrats win.
Bob, unmute yourself, Bob, and ask away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mark. I think David and his people did a great job in trying to even find people that could participate in this kind of uncommitted approach. But one thing I think we all should realize, it was almost unanimous in that group that it's a shame that we've got to choose among these two to lead this country of 330 million people. I mean, when you think about percentage-wise, there ought to be many, many people quite capable of enjoying more support than either one of these candidates. But I think that was one of the things, my biggest take. I think 7 out of 8 expressed that thought.
Oh, it was 8 out of 8. It was 8 out of 8.
Pardon me?
Bob.
Was it 8 out of 8?
And
okay,
Bob, again,
8 out of 8. And
you're-
Mark,
yeah, go
before
ahead,
I go,
Bob.
Mark, I want to say I really enjoy your comments on Mike Smirkanish's show weekly.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. You're nice to listen. As I said earlier, part of why I'm interested in this project is these folks are in many ways a distilled version of speaking for a majority of the electorate, of people who are decided but are deeply unhappy with these choices, are ambivalent about their own candidate, but just know that there's no way they're voting for that other guy. And that, as I said, these folks give voice to that in a way that is distinctive and unique, but in a sense representative. I ask for hands if folks want to raise their hand, if you want to get in before we close. We may not make it all the way to the top of the hour. Asking people to spend 2 hours with anybody without having Caitlin Clark here is above and beyond. So I'll ask again, if you want to get a question in, please raise your hand. Rena has her hand up. So Rena, I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask away.
So I was struck by the fact that you kept on asking the question, is there anything that Biden can do? And the answer kept on being, well, no, it's too late. And I couldn't help but think, well, he actually, in the immigration, the Democrats gave the Republicans in Congress practically everything they asked for. And because Trump said, no, you can't take this deal. And that didn't even seem to get mentioned in this group, because I don't think it's all one narrative now. There aren't any sort of slight changes you can make to the narrative, because they're not, it's already one way. I mean, that was the sense I got from the question, the way they answered your question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question about, is it too late? Is there anything you can do? Lauren, you have thoughts on that, or Noah?
I mean, I guess it's, you know, that's where it starts, you start to wonder, how undecided are they really, right? If they have this negative opinion that can't be swayed, they're not especially open, you know, to what's happening on the ground on a regular basis, nor did I get the sense that they were really paying super close attention, which again, I think is pretty typical of a lot of Americans. You know, again, it didn't see, I thought they seemed less undecided than, I know your screening was right on, I know you did everything, David, but I think at the end of the day, like, people do tend to, they have closely held views even when they haven't decided who they're going to vote for.
Lauren, we're going to have to bring you into the widget factory so you can see a little bit more about how
No, I'm not questioning the widgets. I swear.
No, I know you're not, but you want to know more about the widgets.
I do. I'm that kind of geek.
And the widget building.
Two things that I'll, you know, both addressing both of those things is one thing that you can see in focus groups, you know, two things happen. As you do kind of, the conversation allows you to see kind of what they are passionate about and thinking about in ways that you kind of can't find in polling sometimes. But the other thing is the conversation ends up becoming called a treatment in itself, especially with Undecideds. That was the deepest conversation they've ever had. I can tell you right now, and the most rich conversation they've ever had on the issues, and they're being probed and probed and probed. And so I think that, you know, some of that ends up kind of, we call it treating them, right? So they're like getting exposure to information. They're thinking in ways they haven't thought before and being forced to say stuff. And so, you know, that can kind of lead you down a certain emotional path. And you can start clarifying when you start talking about these issues. Some of that, you know, what we know is something we should even think about. Well, what order do we introduce things even next time to maybe like not lead with things that, I don't care how many undecided focus groups we do. They're all not, I mean, it's not going to be great for Biden on the economy and immigration. So if you know, kind of things, I'm not criticizing our own methodology too much. I'm just saying, but some of that does happen. And I think, and not as much with when you do focus groups with Biden supporters and Trump supporters, because they already talk about their stuff all the time.
Yep.
And so the focus group itself kind of takes on its own life. And so that's something to keep a little caution of. I mean, it's very important insights, but as we're seeing them, the conversation ends up kind of like molding them as it kind of goes. And in this case, I mean, that's an important insight, because maybe this is, you know, if they start talking about politics, you know, they're going to be more angry at Biden than they are going to be at Trump. Maybe that's what you see. But anyways, so those are important things about focus groups to keep in mind. I know that didn't quite answer your question, but I will say the original question was about the whether or not, I mean, I don't think that, I mean, my experience with Undecided or people like this, they're fatigued, and I mean, I can probably tell you a couple of the profiles on here, like they don't care what happens in Washington. They don't care. They're not, I mean, they've halfway paying attention. They've seen it 100 times. They've seen the show before. Someone's going to say, we're doing great. We're doing everything great. And they're like, but this is how I'm feeling. And so I think that that's going to continue to happen with this group of people.
Yeah.
And people could disagree with that too, but you know,
I agree with that. Mona.
Yes, I just wanted to ask real quickly what some of the guests or what you might think, Mark, about the fact that I found it interesting that they all united in being opposed to the notion that voting for a third party was throwing away their vote. And do you think that maybe a certain percentage will be voting for the third party in the end of undecided voters?
Noah, you have thoughts on that?
I feel like, well, it's a feeling, so I don't have any data to support it. But given the state of play at the level of the two major parties being so close, and everybody knows it's a very tight election, that the impulse to, especially in competitive states, to throw your vote to a third party candidate will fade. I expect that partisans and leaners especially will come home to one or the other major candidacies, and particularly in part because the major candidates who are running on a third party label, Cornel West and RFK Jr., have positions that are way outside the mainstream. They're appealing to a very, very narrow sliver of voters who are highly represented online and very hard to find in the real world. and I think they will find them that limits their appeal on election day.
I think the thing that's mostly going to limit their appeal is they're not going to get on the ballot. And I think what's also going to limit their appeal is that you're going to see a much more concerted effort by the Democrats, at least, and maybe by the Republicans, to do damage to these people than we've ever seen before. Democrats have learned their lesson from 2000, learned their lesson from 2016. And they've already got it apparatus at the DNC with very skilled people. Mary Beth Cahill, Liz Smith, the top operatives in the party now devote to this. That's never been the case, even in the
But
last
they're going to have to devote
months.
resources.
They are.
They're going to have to spend resources.
But they've got money. The countervailing thing is, and this is why it's possible to me it could grow, we've never had two candidates less popular. We've never had a greater hunger. But I think these candidates they're bad candidates. They're just not good. Not only are they out of the mainstream, not only are they not on the ballot, not only are they going to be pummeled, they're just not very good. There's an opening for someone good, but they're just not very good. Checking the clock here. I want to let Lauren and David and Noah, all of you, if you have anything, you can pass. But if there's anything closing you want to say before we go, I want to wrap up with a few remarks about this this project. But Lauren, David, Noah, anything any of you want to say before we go?
Well, one thing we didn't touch on, because we were really talking about what people were saying, is the persuadable factor and the ground game, right? And the reason why parties organize structured ground games and door knocking and all of the volunteers that they do across the country is exactly to reach people like this. And I think you made a fascinating point, David, about, when people get sort of pushed to think more deeply, they do sort of settle in one direction or the other. And that's why we have campaigning. So, I think we'll see where this falls out. It's going to be especially critical in some of these really close states, to Noah's point. And, we'll all be watching.
Noah?
Well, I think the focus groups with undecided voters are extremely valuable, even though they personally drive me crazy. Forced myself to read the New York Times focus groups that Kristen Soltis Anderson conducts. And without exception, there's a lot of voters in there who will say things that I just drive me nuts, because I focus on it at a granular level. This is what I do with my day job. And then all of a sudden you hear somebody say, well, Donald Trump, he's never lied to anybody. He's a businessman. He knows how to navigate this environment. And Joe Biden, man, he's a straight shooter. That guy is a blue collar guy from Scranton, all this stuff just drives me crazy. But nevertheless, this is how voters think, and you do have to get close to it. And if you don't, your analysis suffers for it. So it's a very valuable exercise. Thank you both for doing it.
Of course, thank you. David, about 11 and a half hours ago, you made your television debut on Morning Joe. You don't look the least bit exhausted to me. Just high on adrenaline.
Check my spot this morning, David.
Oh.
So David, closing thoughts for you about this discussion, or anything you want to tell folks about the project going forward?
Well, to Lauren's point, the ground game, this is why, everyone who's still, been in politics and as digital as the world gets, like, we do talk about the ground game and going and having conversations. And so I hadn't thought about that as a result of this group, but you can see how forcing people to have conversations, and hopefully strategic conversations, if you're running a ground game, is still, the gold standard and what can help win elections, and even phone banking and having those conversations. But it's tough to get them. As we saw in recruiting this group, it was very difficult to get them and get, especially this type of group. But you go knock on doors, it's just like anything in sales. You got to just go intercept them and see and try. And so both sides, I think, are the ones that, are going to launch. I imagine it'll be the biggest ground operations we've seen, but they've got so much infrastructure. Biden started being with Obama, and then Trump's really continue to ramp his up since 2016. It's much more sophisticated than it was back then. So I do think you'll see that. But otherwise, my closing remark is that, looking at the comments and hearing things, I got excited about the next one. And, whether the next one's another Undecideds and we do it in North Carolina and Georgia, or we find one of these really cool segments, and we'll continue to incorporate some of the feedback into everything from the questionnaire that we send out in the survey and to the screener, and making sure we're getting even richer information on these participants and understanding, so we can answer better questions on calls like this.
David, thank you. And Noah, thank you. And Lauren, thank you. And thanks to Vin and Tim and everyone else who was on, Amy and others. So thank you all. And thank you all for joining us. We're excited about this project. I really love the level of engagement we had. You're going to get from us the links to both this 2-hour event, which included the 45-minute focus group, as well as just a clean link to the full focus group. Love for you to share it with people. particularly younger people, because a big part of this is to try to get younger people engaged in this election. No offense to my guesstimate of the average age of folks on here, but we do want to have younger people engaged in this conversation in two-way and in these focus groups. So as we go forward, feel free to share the links. You'll get them, and feel free to tell people about how they can sign up to be part of this going forward. We'll be back in touch once we've got the next one scheduled. David and I and our colleagues are going to sit and think about it. But we hope you enjoyed it, not just because it's fascinating if you like politics, but because we all need to be together as we think about this very difficult year with two presidential candidates, major party nominees, who are not necessarily the top choices for tens of millions of people. Thank you again for making time. Look in your inbox for the links. Have a great evening. Thank you.